Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film A Star is Born from 1937. And this is continuing my quest to review as much of William Wellman's filmography as I possibly can. A Star is Born is one of the classic Hollywood romances, and it's the first William Wellman film in color, thus why I'm shooting this video in color for once instead of all the black and white ones. It's actually the first Technicolor film to be nominated for Best Picture, and it was one of the few modern films shot in Technicolor. Apparently they did it more for like big costumes and things like that, but Wellman being Wellman, he of course just wanted to be a modern kind of regular movie just in Technicolor, and apparently a lot of critics liked that at the time because it was very different. And I think that's why the Technicolor process works in this. Now, it's not as great as the Technicolor that would come about 2 years later in Wizard of Oz. This is the Hollywood movie about Hollywood. I can't think of I mean, I guess LA Confidential, but it's really the film most people think of when you think of a Hollywood film about Hollywood. A girl played by Janet Gaynor who leaves her small town farmhouse where she's kind of degraded by her aunt and told she can never be a Hollywood star, and then goes off to Hollywood and tries to make it in the movies. She tries to be an extra. She's really dissuaded by almost everybody from doing it, but she really wants to be a movie actress. And then one time when she's working as a waitress, she meets Norman Maine, played by Frederick March. And he's a famous Hollywood star. He's kind of coming down from his fame. He's a big drunk and he's ridiculous, but they kind of fall in love and get married, and he starts her career, and they give her name, Vicki Lester, and she becomes a huge star, and she stars in his picture with him, and it films a hit more because of her than because of him. And slowly he is in less and less films, and they're less and less of a hit, and her films become bigger and bigger, and she becomes a bigger and bigger star until that kind of becomes in conflict as his star lowers and her star rises. It's interesting to think of this film with Wellman because Wellman's more known for being grittier, being a leaner, economical filmmaker, and I don't think big Hollywood romance films about Hollywood are known for those kind of things. But that's kind of why I think a lot of big producers, and especially David O. Selznick, who was the producer on this, really wanted to work with someone like Wellman. They knew he was talented, and they knew he could make a good picture, and they knew he wouldn't go too crazy. With Wellman, they really wanted a director who could bring it on budget and make a good film, because really he's a very fine director, and since he's economical and lean, you're not wasting time with the audience. You know, you're really getting in there and getting out. And this is a very epic Hollywood romance film. If you see his films like So Big, which is a big epic story put into less than 90 minutes, and this is almost 2 hours. He's really good at doing kind of these epic stories that I think normally, and especially now, this kind of film would be 3 hours or 2 hours and 25 minutes or something like that. And Wellman keeps the length down, but doesn't keep the impact of it down. He knows how to make a scene really matter if you're going to be a lean, economical storyteller. This is the second film he wrote, or he's credited with writing. A lot of people helped write this film, apparently like 12 writers, so I guess Hollywood hasn't changed that much. There's some debate over whether Wellman came up with the story or who came up with the story. Apparently it's kind of based on a film, What Price Hollywood, which was directed by George Cukor. Interestingly enough, George Cukor directed the first remake of A Star is Born in the 50s with Judy Garland and James Mason, which is also a really good film. He was actually offered a chance of directing this by Selznick, and he turned it down. He got Wellman to do it, and I guess Wellman started writing it, but he put in a lot of his own experiences he'd seen from various Hollywood marriages that he'd had from his own experience. Supposedly the scene where the judge is kind of lecturing Norman Maine, played by Frederick March, that's something that really happened to Wellman. At this time he had calmed down. He was already married to his wife Dottie. I feel like some of these wild antics were probably things he actually did. There's always been the rumor, and it's never been confirmed, even now, it's based on Barbara Stanwyck's first marriage. Wellman worked with Stanwyck quite a bit, so I think that could be understandable because he was quite close with her. They were really good friends, and he probably would have seen that marriage firsthand. So I'm wondering if maybe that adds some validity to it, but no one's really sure. Apparently the original film, What Price Hollywood, that some say this is a remake of, but some say isn't, that film is actually based on Colleen Moore, who Wellman also worked with, interestingly enough. And this is based on so much of real-life Hollywood experience, but a lot of people claim this film is kind of in love with Hollywood. It views Hollywood too glamorously. I don't think that is very true, and I've thought that before and I've kind of liked it for that, but watching it this time I noticed how meaner and harsher a look at Hollywood it is, and how it kind of views Hollywood as someone's always rising and someone's always falling. If you're the rising person, you're going to be the falling person. It views Hollywood with quite a lot of cynicism, specifically the role of the head of publicity. I think it really kind of does not paint a good picture. It shows Wellman's cynicism that comes out in other films and has come out more playfully in films like Lily Turner, but I think in A Star is Born, it's really kind of a darker cynicism than I've seen from him in his other films. There's some lighter moments to it, but this is very much a tragic romance, and it's probably one of the most famous classic Hollywood tragic romances. Working on all those assignment pictures prepared him for something like this. Now, this was a major hit. It was the biggest film of 1937, the highest grossing film, I guess, the biggest moneymaker. It was nominated for Best Picture. It won a Best Screenplay award, which is the only Oscar I believe Wellman won. He didn't win for Wings. It's just his only film to win Best Picture. Him and Robert Carson, who were the two credited screenwriters, even though there were like 10 other guys, they were the credited screenwriters, so they won Best Story, which I guess was the best screenplay of the time. And there's been countless remakes of this. I mean, if you think of the one in the 50s with Judy Garland and James Mason, and then the one in the 70s with Barbra Streisand and Chris Christopherson, which I have not seen. And then even Martin Scorsese's film New York, New York, which I think he's even admitted to was kind of his riff on A Star is Born. And there's probably more I can't even think. I mean, The Artist is kind of like a silent version of A Star is Born in a lot of ways. Wellman works in universal themes. He works in broad themes, especially in this film. But he also makes it so, if you look at any Hollywood acceptance speech or you listen to any interview with Hollywood stars, they never act like they're an insider, even though to you and I, they definitely are, and they're more so insiders than we would ever think we are. And in this, I feel like Frederick March's Norman Maine character feels like he's an outsider. He looks like an insider, but he becomes an outsider. And same with Janet Gaynor. I feel like she's kind of an insider, but she kind of isn't. And that's something that runs through Fame and through movie stardom all throughout it. You know, no Oscar acceptance speech is complete without them talking about where they came from and how their life is so hard and how no one knows what it's like to be them and we're just like you. I think A Star is Born plays off of that. It plays off of kind of the ideas that Wellman's been playing with throughout all his films, but it plays into that stardom idea so well. He knows how to do an outsider, whether it's a film he had just done, I think it was a year or two before, The Robin Hood of El Dorado, whether it was Public Enemy, whether it was Wild Boys of the Road or Heroes for Sale. He was ready for this kind of a picture, and he could do it. And I think also because he doesn't get too into the glamour, he gets into kind of the everyday lives of it. It's still a very good Hollywood tale, but I think when you look at a lot of kind of basic TV movies or of Hollywood stories and stuff, or Mommy Dearest or things like that, they get too into the glamour and the excess, and that's usually what you remember. But I think the thing about A Star is Born is you remember the story, the romance. It's not so interested in all the glamour and like, oh, look what I can do on screen. That's something Wellman didn't like, the bombast, and this is the kind of film you expect bombast from. This and A Call of the Wild, it's like very similar, where you're like, oh wow, this is a lot more kind of toned down than I'd expect from a film like this, from a big Hollywood production. That's one of the better things about Wellman as a director, that you could do things like this, and a lot of directors I don't think can kind of tone it down as much as Wellman can. It just has her returning home from work. It doesn't have as much stuff like she's coming off the set of this, you know, extravagant set and shoot that they're doing. They're not as interested in that. It's more based on the human emotions. It's really just about Norman Maine, Vicki Lester, her friend who's an assistant director played by Eddie Devine, the studio head, and the publicity chief. It's really, you know, everyone else is a lot more minor. You know, it's very kind of contained within these few people, and it almost has this family element. There's a lot of sentimentality in this as well. It almost is kind of similar to something like Public Enemy or any of his films, where he has like this epic long scale, and you see people change over time. Wellman really, I think, likes showing how people will change, how their morals will change, their personalities will change based on the things that happen to them over time. As much as he likes sentimentality, he likes tearing it apart through kind of the process of a decade or 5 years, showing like what can happen to people, how people can change. Although he kind of likes to dwell on those moments as much as he likes to take them apart. Is one of the ones that displays that kind of storytelling format more than any of them. This film isn't really necessarily about the times they live in. It's about 30s Hollywood. obviously, but there's no point where they mention anything that's happening that's time specific. That's another thing that I think makes this film so universal. It's very broad, the 30s, and I think that's what keeps this film kind of more alive. They don't even say like, oh, you made pre-code pictures, the code has come in, so you can't do that. That's not even said or mentioned. It's very just Hollywood. I love Fredric March. Fredric March is a great actor. If you've never seen his Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, you are missing out quite a bit. That really shows his range, and some of the scenes he does in that are just marvelous and fantastic. I love seeing Fredric March, and he was really great in this film. He plays such a vulnerability, but also a toughness, and he can play that star quality to him. I love Janet Gaynor in this film. She has such a sweetness and a likableness to her. You can understand how she became Vicky Lester and how she became so likable. She has that star quality to her. It's almost interesting if you think of Fredric March's performance. You never get to really understand why he was likable. You don't get to see why he became a star. You just see the downslope. When I was a teenager and I'd see some of these stars who were kind of on the downslope, and I didn't understand why they were famous. And years later I would, but it's almost looking at it from that kind of a perspective, like not really knowing. But if you think of it in a lot of ways, that's how stars become irrelevant, is because if you don't get the introduction that they get initially, time moves on. Janet Gaynor is so likable as Vicky Lester. She's really just infectious in her likability, but she plays a lot of great range in this film. There's a scene early in the film where she's being a waitress and she's trying to impress all these Hollywood types, trying to make it in the biz, and she does all these impressions in different dialects, and it was just like, I was laughing hysterically. It is just, that is an amazing scene. She has a lot to do as an actress in this film, and it really shows how great of an actress she really is, that she could take on so much in this film. She plays it off very well and stays insanely likable. This film really does show the bad side of fame, and it shows a lot of things from old Hollywood that I didn't even know about. There's a lot of instances that come from real Hollywood stories. They tried to keep it as authentically Hollywood as they can. Janet Gaynor actually used her own Academy Award she won for Seventh Heaven from the first Oscar ceremony, which Wellman was not at, but Wings won Best Picture. And actually, when Fredric March's character, Norman Maine, gets really drunk and has that big public display at the Oscars, that kind of happened to Janet Gaynor, because at her first Academy Awards, her sister came and got really drunk and totally embarrassed her. Although I don't think interrupted her acceptance speech, but whatever. It's so based on what really happened. It's like, let's show the rawness of it. And I think there's a real rawness and a trueness to A Star is Born, but it's also so universal. And that shows a lot about how smart of a filmmaker Wellman really was. He really wanted to make things economical and lean, and when you do that, it turns out to be very universal. When I've looked at all these films that Wellman's directed up to this point, I can really see a really fine, big Hollywood filmmaker who knows how to make big Hollywood movies. And that's why Selznick wanted to work with him. David O. Selznick was a huge, huge producer, and he was smart enough to work with somebody who he knew could deliver a big epic film, but not get too much with it. He didn't want Cecil B. DeMille. Wellman's kind of the opposite of Cecil B. DeMille, whereas Wellman is not going, like in Call the Wild, he's not going to overdo it with these epic shots to show how amazing the landscape is. In this, he's not going to go on and on about how amazing the lifestyle is of being famous and being a movie star. He's just showing the relationship, and that says a lot about Wellman as a filmmaker and as a storyteller, and is why this film is such a classic. So if you have seen A Star is Born and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments, and subscribe if you would like to. And the next film in my William Wellman series will be Nothing Sacred, which I believe was released the same year and also stars Fredric March. And that will be next week, probably Tuesday or Wednesday, maybe Thursday, maybe even Monday. And I hope to see you then.